you should see this with a sense of urgency.
Tried to do with this act is to provide certainty for rural Americans and for farmers.
Legal structure. The great thing is this bill allows for a lot of the benefits which weren't available now to be available to these structures.
Yeah, the breadth of eligibility has expanded so much.
And the intention, they're saluting American agriculture and saying, we want American agriculture to be aggressively involved in research. So this is much more like treating agriculture like a business. This is a very, very significant benefit.
Can a state dictate how another state runs its business?
The impact is today, impact is tomorrow.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the next series in the Ag Expo events that you've seen. Many of you have been here before at the events and other webinars, but today's is especially relevant, and I would say almost you should see this with a sense of urgency. Today's topic is we're going to talk about the recent legislation that has had a major impact on agriculture and agriculture producers and vendors. But ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just a small act. This is the biggest, most intentional act that many of us has ever seen and probably has ever taken place. Folks called it the big, beautiful bill, but by any definition, it has had a major impact on agriculture and energy. These are the Siamese twins for the productivity of the United States and actually for our national security. More about that later. But first, I'd like to introduce the brilliant panel, excepting myself. Seth Mullen, who's an expert in legal, agricultural law, estate law, and tax law, and he practices here in Omaha, Nebraska with Dvorak. And I've got Jonathan Blant, who is associated with Senator Grassley. Jonathan is here not only because he's handsome and intelligent, but because he's had a role tracking this legislation with Senator Grassley for many years, and it's all culminated in a big intentional bill that has, as we said, a great impact on agriculture. Well, let's get into that right away and start to talk about what some of the topics are today. I'll try to frame this up for you and in several ways. First of all, in today's agenda, we're going to talk about the problems, the challenges in agriculture that have been addressed, and in a very thoughtful way to create opportunities. These opportunities are couched in terms of the quickly changing economic format of the world in terms of supply and demand. This bill provides new safety nets and more financial risk management tools. It has provisions on clean energy and how research is even being accelerated now on behalf of agriculture for new markets and new products. Many provisions in this act cover taxes, and we're going to drill down on those. And have your pad and paper ready, because you're going to learn that there's three component parts that you almost have to take action on. Seth's going to cover those, but you're going to have to look at how you're structured. You're going to have to look at activities in the Tax Act themselves, and you're going to have to be really concerned about moving promptly to take advantage of this in 25 and 6 and 7. There's also a basket of additional opportunities in this bill. So here we go. Let's jump into it. But before we get into the details, let's step back and see what actually happened here in our national security priorities for the United States of America. As you can see in this chart, really what's happened in this act is the President of the United States, the Congress, the Senate, and the House came together in only a 3 or 4 month period of time from scratch with a white sheet of paper and says they're going to change the policies of the United States based on national security interests to make us absolutely fully secure and independent for food and for energy. That's agriculture, and it's energy in terms of production of energy. Those two are intertwined. So you can see that in the future, energy, corn, soybeans, livestock production is going to be directly affected intentionally by this bill, and they are going to start to accelerate the volatility. There are going to be larger swings in prices. There's going to be larger swings in production. And some of these are complementary or systemic, and they will feed off each other. It's this volatility also that calls for better risk management techniques, which we're going to talk about later with partners, but also the parts of this that are in the bill. But let's basically go back to the basics of how the legislation like this works. This is really a mega bill by any standards, one of the biggest we've ever seen. And how that works is it was passed and is now in the hands of agencies. In the early days, right after passage, what happens is that it starts to trickle down or migrate into agencies for them to later start to move towards implementation. So think of yourself on a river. You're in a boat. You're going down the river. You're in motion. And so you have to start to think about taking control of the boat. What's happening, this legislation is going to fall into the hands of the agencies, Treasury, so you can think about it as be taxes, agriculture, that's obvious, energy, greatly increasing energy production, and commerce, which is another synthetic way of saying trade, and we have to step up our game in marketing. With more supply, we have to break those products into more valuable products, and we have to sell them more effectively. So we have to be much more aggressive in marketing. This bill addresses all of those features. The global supply is going to increase, demands are going to shift, and there's whole new policies put in place will have to now be promulgated into rules, regulations, procedures, and let's see how that starts to play out. At this point, I'd like to transition over to Seth, and he can talk about, I think, a stair-step way to get into this act, but while he does that, trust me, he's going to start sharing with you a lot of valuable ideas on how you need to take control of your organization and your planning process right now. Right now means today, because you don't have much time to restructure or structure your organization or take the planning steps. So, Seth, turning it over to you, how would you put your arms around explaining the best parts of this bill and what requires action?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Grant. It's great to be here this morning. So, like Grant said, this bill is sweeping, right? And when we were kind of talking about this before as a group, some have referred to it as a tax bill. I mean, it's an economic bill, and it provides government funding, provides tax relief, provides ag subsidy provisions and crop insurance and different things like that. And so it's like you said, it's sweeping. And what I want to get home today, and he said, is the immediacy of kind of acting now and pointing out areas where the impact is today, impact is tomorrow, and planning opportunities. And we're kind of flying at the 30,000 foot level, if you will. And so jumping into these risks and challenges, you get into this bill and you see, he mentioned the intentionality of it. It was very intentional from a risk management standpoint. And that's with these crop insurance, programs you talk, ARC and PLC, and I'm sure you all are familiar with them. Well, the eligibility has expanded, we mentioned that to go back to, you have to go back now and take a look at your entity structure. Maybe you previously weren't eligible. Now you're eligible for these programs, and some of the sentiments out there, I think, are this is going to be a large, farmer rancher benefit, and going back to the intentionality of it, there are provisions in here specific, very intentional to kind of the new beginning farmer ranchers, with respect to these programs and eligibility and support from 5 to 10 years on these programs. But a lot of these programs are effective. This bill was signed in July 2025 this year. And so these programs and these amendments and changes are being effective this year. So going back and start planning and being intentional about kind of eligibility criterias.
Seth, I think what you're making is really a big point here, and that is when we started out in agriculture, individual farmers owned farms in a family partnership. Maybe they owned it as a proprietorship. But as the farms have gotten larger, bigger equipment need to expand, spread out their costs over more acres, they've come into some other different structure. Those structures could be pass-through entities like Subchapter S, LLCs, LLPs, but prior to this act, many of the benefits weren't eligible for those vehicles because it was more directed back to the old thought. If you're a farmer on the farm as an individual, you got the benefits, but you were excluded from the safety nets. You're excluded from this. That's not the case. Now there's a very intentional idea to allow a larger scope of organizations and Subchapter S's, pass-through entities, which couldn't get these benefits because they were expressed only for individuals. Now the benefits are available for those entities.
Correct.
And that is monumental. So what we said before we got on there was, you've got to go back right now and figure out how you're organized and organize for the future for the next 5 to 10 years of how you can keep your organization sustainable, how you can preserve it and build and grow that organization. And it's probably going to be in some legal structure. The great thing is this bill allows for a lot of the benefits which weren't available now to be available to these structures.
Yeah. And even in addition to those legal structures, the S corps, the LLCs that you mentioned now being within the eligibility criteria, you have other farming operations, like you talk about maybe crops that are operating strictly on forward contracting and things like that are getting calculated into these base acre allocations, which I know Jonathan will touch on a little bit later. And we don't need to get into the weeds, but point is that the breadth of eligibility has expanded so much. And the other point I think that's worth making here too is some of these coverages, ARC, which, the risk coverage, the price loss coverages, historically use kind of one or the other. For this year, you automatically get the higher of them. So you don't necessarily lose out if you made the wrong election, if you will. Now going forward, you're going to have to enroll in one or the other, and so that's where key planning comes back into play. But for this year, I think there's a huge benefit on eligibility under some of these safety net programs. So
yes, I think these safety net programs, the crop insurance, the safety net programs, really go back to the 1950s, and that is where there was massive overproductions or decreased prices. And I remember in the 80s it came again. But America has always treated farmers and agriculture with an appropriate level of special attention. We know that we can't let our population run out of food. We know that as a policy now that's been articulated with crystal clear clarity that we're going to be a major exporter. We want to produce these agriculture products for ourselves and for the rest of the world. That is our strategy, just like energy. But what they're saying intentionally is, there could be oversupply. They could be oversupply in certain 12 months or 36 months or 4-month periods. And so they've extended as a basis to keep people in business, safety nets, and raising minimum pricing. And in here, it's an elegant solution, but they have to take advantage of it by structuring themselves appropriately. And now many more people, if you're in agriculture, can get these floors established, but that's going to take some planning, I'd say in the next 90 days, to look at how you're structured.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I guess, kind of moving on and continuing on here with some of the other provisions in this thing, we get into kind of the clean energy research portion here. And there are a couple key topics, I think, that are worth noting here, again, along the theme of get back now, look at the entity structure, how you guys are all set up from your operational standpoint, and then planning opportunities, for this year and then going forward. So a couple big ones that I think that we've all kind of talked about are with respect to the wind and solar credits. There's a phase out of this, and the point I kind of want to make on this from an immediate standpoint is going to be eligibility for some of these credits goes back to when construction began on some of these products or projects rather. And they put a kind of a hard deadline on construction beginning July 4th of next year, 2026, for being able to be eligible for portions of this credit. So that's kind of the phase out, and then they phased it out a little further through 2027 and so on. A big one, this next one here, the extension of these clean fuel credits, which I think when we talk about market demand, I think this is one that's really going to absolutely drive global market demand. And I say that because the change specifically that they made with respect to eligibility here again, and it has to be feedstocks based in U.S., Mexico, Canada, and so it's really honing in on domestic feedstock, which I think is super important and inevitably is going to drive demand for local sourced.
Here's a good way to segment this and get it in perspective. So basically in agriculture and energy, the concomitant focus is on one element, that's carbon, C, okay? So when you increase and make carbon and energy and fuel more available, you also almost automatically enable it to be used in agriculture. That could be for diesel fuel, but could be for fertilizer and so on. So that's in the production cycle. So in the production cycle, these elements on strong energy get the crop produced. But what happens next is in breaking down that soybean, that little round pill, and the little round corn. Now what's happening is there's a great push to break that kernel of corn down, that soybean product down, into really valuable, step up in valuable value products. In order to do that, re-enter energy. That almost always requires heat or pressure or some application of energy again. But this bill is very thoughtful because it also reflects, and it's buried in here, and you have to really understand the intention. They're saluting American agriculture and saying, we want American agriculture to be aggressively involved in research. Research could be in taking these products and breaking them down and creating a whole nother suite of products. I know that Bunge The corn growers, soybean growers, Sire is very active in this, just like they are in risk management tools for you. But this is a big opportunity for us to develop new products and step it up. But you have to have energy to produce it the first time. You have to have energy to break down the molecules and readjust the products the second time. That's why these are Huntley-Brinkley. They trade with each other. This is a brilliant bill, and they've also put in controls on that. So I just want to point out that agriculture is one of the most advanced group of population of cohorts. Farmers and people involved in agriculture are very good with computers, with data, with information, and that is now being expanded and saluted by even more incentives to do what? More research, more product development. Isn't this wonderful? Well, let's go on now and try and dive into this tax area, which is kind of a frightening area for most folks. But for you and I are kind of geeks in this area. Boy, there's some diamonds in here. Let's try to find out what they are.
Yeah. And if maybe we go back real quick on the tax, still on the tax piece, but go back one slide here to the R&D deductions here, which is very much related to the tax piece of it. And I think this is going to touch home with you pretty closely, Grant. But they've put in here, obviously, deductibility now, immediate deductibility for certain research and experimentation, and that could mean genetic testing on livestock for quality of meat,
yes.
And I know that's near and dear to your heart. The other tax component here, just going back real quick to the clean energy piece, the one point I think, again, with the theme here, planning, is they added in here kind of transferability of these clean energy credits. And so I think that creates a really great planning opportunity for folks and entities that have these credits that may not be able to use them, that can transfer them. Obviously, there's complexities with all of that, but that's the point here today is obviously that there's planning here with these new provisions that they put in related to these tax credits and so forth. The other point I just do want to make too on this R&D, and I'm gonna call it R&E, just not to confuse it with R&D, because that's a separate tax credit. Again, kind of probably geeking out a little bit too much here on tax stuff, but the R&E is a deduction that can coordinate with R&D credits potentially, because R&E deductions that might be available. I mentioned genetic testing on livestock. You can do soil testing, irrigation, management and improving irrigation. There's obviously limitations and requirements for these. But the fact that they've included this in is I think a massive benefit for, ag producers out there. So to the next slide though, on kind of the more, and we'll geek out, like you said, over this this stuff. And this is probably, and I think one of the main reasons we all wanted to do this is the bill, at least from my perspective, and maybe it's just because I'm a tax attorney, has gotten the headlines. The big tax pieces of it have obviously gotten the big headlines, and when you're talking no tax on tips and all this overtime stuff. But I think there's very specific applications here to a lot of you in the audience today. I mean, just starting the permanent lower tax brackets that they made permanent in here, and increasing the standard deduction have their obvious, benefits. But then you get into the specific ones where you can, the capital gains deferral on sale of farmland. And this is going to be for 2026. So sales, happening January 1, 2026 going forward. And there has to be a qualified farm purchaser. And there's going to be some things to work out and how to define all of that and everything. But the point is now there's a deferral mechanism where that would have to have been recognized immediately. You can spread that out over 4 years, which is the economic impact, I think, is pretty substantial there on the sale of farmland. And I think one of the potential benefits is and ag has been a lock and hold on real estate, and transitioning it at death and things like that. I think you might see some more because of some of these deferrals. One, you're going to want to sell it to a qualified farm purchaser, and which keeps it in the industry, a farming operation. But two, I think you're going to see more in-life transfers of real estate than
Yeah, I think this is an interesting thing. Most of us who've been in agriculture can remember buying land at $300 or $400 an acre, and now some of that land is worth $20,000 or $15,000 an acre. It's the same dirt, it's the same land. It's a very high cost business. Agriculture is a low margin, high capex business. But this bill really did a couple of the right things. One of them is you talked about. In the simplest sense, there's a way now to sell your farm if you decide to exit farming, but get special tax benefits by not only spreading it out at lower rates, but even reinvesting in one of these opportunity zones, which is a whole nother subject. But a bigger part, the Ganzenmacher, the big idea here is that now on your estate for a husband and wife, you get $30 million of the floor for valuation. So now you can pass $30 million through your estate. And if you do it with a smart generation skipping trust, you can do it to your grandchildren or even past that, which you need to take advantage of. So the irony is people in agriculture are asset rich and cash poor. And they always will be, but because the land, there's only a limited amount, it's going to continue to escalate. And so there's going to be more and more tax problems. But this bill intentionally gave an off-ramp for people that wanted to liquidate some of their assets, and it gave an inclusion ramp for the transferability of it to keep control of it in vehicles. So an off-ramp and an inclusion ramp, and they are sensational. They're really, really interesting if you understand how big these are going to be and how to take advantage of them. So I also think we should talk about this expanded deductibility. This is where you can get 179, you can make these major deductions, and instead of capitalizing it's over 15 years or 7 years, you can expense it, right?
Yeah. So they made permanent the bonus depreciation, which is 100%, which can work in connection with the 179 expensing deduction. And so this, again, going to the planning and kind of determining, which avenue to go down, which is going to suit you best is paramount. So on the bonus side, again, this is all effective immediately too for 2025 here. And I think there's major opportunity, obviously, in being able to expense and depreciate an asset immediately, 100% of it in a current tax year. But I know that's not a one size fits all for everybody, and so that's where 179 they increased that to the $2.5 million amount, and also I think a lot of times people just not get pigeonholed, but they choose this bonus depreciation, accelerate everything, generate massive net operating losses, NOLs, which are still in effect. So the rules under NOLs still apply today. There's no change, meaning there's the carry forward limitations on NOLs, but then also the back opportunities with NOLs. 179, you're not going to generate an NOL with 179 because of its limitations on being capped at your taxable income. Whereas a bonus depreciation could generate an NOL. And so what, simply just elementary, it's you buy a farm equipment for $500,000, taxable income's $300,000, you got a $200,000 net operating loss. Now you look at the tax provisions of the NOLs and how that can be utilized, which could include potentially, kind of carrying it back, get refunds. But that's not, again, I don't want to say that's a one size fits all for everybody. Because sometimes, tax planning, if you're planning for a higher income tax year, it might not be necessarily beneficial to generate such high NOLs in one specific year because of the limitations and so forth.
So I think one important thing for the audience to remember is the historical context, that farming has a unique advantage that other companies don't. And that is, generally speaking, most companies, New York Stock Exchange companies, bigger companies, are relegated to using generally accepted accounting principles. In other words, they accrue their expenses, they accrue their income, they have to use the accrual method. Agriculture has a special benefit in that they generally are available to take cash benefits. And so the grandfather of this logic of creating these big lumpy deductions goes back to a theory of tax that's eligible for agriculture, which is basically to retain a cash basis. But what's happened here is, instead of buying a combine or putting in a center pivot thing and writing it off over a number of years, it's shifted. It was, you buy it, you can deduct it. Well, that's really the way it was supposed to be in the first place, because this is an industry where a lot of CapEx needs to be made. So you need to make sure that you can deduct it. So later on, I'm going to talk about how this is going to affect your relationship with your banker and your credit agreements, because this is a very, very significant benefit, because these tax benefits and cash flow can then be swept and used against amortization of the debt, which will make your creditor happier, perhaps giving you more favorable rates and even longer term financing. So these tax benefits, when used as carry forwards or carry backs, increase the amortization capability against debt. Debt is a friend of farmers, and they need to do it. So these taxes might be thinking of cash, but really what it means is this is a very sophisticated way to expand credit availability to agriculture. I can cover that later.
And one other point real quick on this slide too is the SALT deduction, which, for those unfamiliar with that acronym, state and local tax. And a lot of you out there are paying, at the state level, local level, different property taxes and sales taxes, use taxes. They did increase the deduction at the federal level for what you can deduct if you're paying those state level taxes. But I think another key point there is they didn't do anything with this PTET, which is the pass-through entity tax in there, which means that there's still the availability to reduce your federal tax amount through the PTET structures, which maybe some of you were, because of some of the other safety net programs and getting eligible there, you were structured one way. Now that's removed. I mean, it's a holistic look here that this PTET is still available to take advantage of reducing your tax burden.
Yeah, that's a good segue back to where we were. First step, sense of urgency. You and your owners of your agriculture properties have to figure out how you're organized. This bill allows you to be organized in pass-through organizations and take these deductions at that level, get the benefits at that level, and preserve them. Prior, those flowed through to you as an individual, and they were capped at the individual. So this is much more like treating agriculture like a business, leaving it somewhat on the cash basis, but allowing them to take large capital expenditures quickly. So I want to shift now on to borrowing and what we see there. And if you can allow me to digress for just a second personally, we've been in the banking business. Arbor Bank's a 160-year-old bank dedicated to agriculture. We also were in the agriculture insurance business, farm credit, affiliated. we also are in the business of selling policies. There's even new insurance policies available now. For example, for livestock, where you can buy an insurance, it's about half the cost of crop insurance. But there's new insurance policies arising, which will allow you to limit your risk, downside risk, on a very cost-effective basis. But let's talk about borrowing. What this bill does is it sets up the ability to actually explore for and drill many more oil wells and gas wells and increase production of natural gas and energy. Concomitantly, it sets up the tables for the United States to nail down, with the title of number one in energy, number one in food production permanently. And to do that, you're going to need financing to pay for this additional investments, or to facilitate the buy-sell agreements or whatever happens on the capital side of your balance sheet in ownership. What's really interesting to me as a banker is right now, our feeling at our bank is that interest rates are simply too high. We're sitting on the edge of our seat saying we want a 50 basis point reduction in rates, followed by another one and another one and another one. We think they're overpriced here, maybe 100 basis points, maybe 200 basis points. But we see with this concomitant benefits flowing through, when those flow through, you're going to need more capital to actually buy the piece of equipment, or to buy the property, or to pay for the R&D expenses, which now can be deducted. So both your revolving credit line, which is your annual facility on your farming operation, and your long-term 30-year mortgage or long-term debt structures will automatically benefit from this act, because you're going to have net deductions available to flow through for amortization. So I view this act as very friendly to borrowers of capital in agriculture. And there are even some nuances in here on giving the banks certain ability to get some tax effective benefits, which, if you own banks like we own banks, what that means is it's going to allow us to have more capital to make more loans. That's pretty interesting. Okay, so that's these stair-step down structures, which are very, very, very sophisticated and well thought out, also reach into another subject, which is credit availability for agriculture. Why is this interesting? Well, one reason it's interesting is agriculture is in good shape. Across the United States, we have ability to look at agricultural credit in all dimensions with their annual servicing. They're coming under pricing pressure right now, but right now we're not like we were in the 80s or 2 or 3 times in the 50s where things really collapsed. Agriculture balance sheets are in pretty darn good shape. It's an interesting time. What a perfect time to put this act in, and it's a perfect time to work out with your creditors how to expand your credit capabilities and needs in the future, and also spend money on research and development, and spend a little money, more money on marketing. So this act has a cascading waterfall effect into your balance sheet. Very clear if you're a banker. Rural opportunity zones. What's a rural opportunity zone?
Yeah, well, that's kind of new in this.
Brand new.
Yeah, Bill. I mean, I'm sure you all have heard of opportunity zones, from prior legislation, and the ability to potentially exclude all capital gains, if you're investing in certain opportunities.
So I think what you're saying is, like the exit strategy, if you sell farm property and you reinvest it in an opportunity zone, which is a new category, agricultural, rural opportunity, which is in your community,
Yep.
You can defer that gain for 5 years, and maybe if you stay in there, pay no tax on it.
Yeah.
So on the exit strategy, you can get an installment basis, but you can also get opportunity zones and ability, excuse me, to roll that out in the future and maybe not pay taxes on it at all.
Right.
This is very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And especially for an industry that's has historically, been very generationally transferred and so forth. So I think I think this provides, like I mentioned earlier, with respect to the capital gains deferral, we're going to see some more in lifetime transfers with this. I guess just two specific points on it that are specific to rural opportunity zones. Because if you all are familiar with opportunity zones, there's lower barrier to entry here on this, and one of them is there was a higher requirement for substantial improvement on opportunity zones. Essentially the funds had to be used for substantial improvement of said opportunity zone. With respect to a rural opportunity zone, and to be clear, those have to be designated yet and defined, and that happens kind of at the state level. But it's half of what a traditional opportunity zone would be. And to your point, it's just so I think it's a great additional add here they had, and going back to the sweeping aspects of this whole bill, it touches so much, and I think it was very intentional with the ag section of it.
So let's use good business management techniques. Let's recap. So far we've learned this bill is intentional. We've learned that this bill has changed how your organization structure can be used to your advantage, and that you first step right now, that's today, in the next 60, 90 days, you have to determine how you want to be organized going forward, because they've opened the door for many more of these benefits to be used at the structure level versus the individual level. That's really important. So that's step one. You have to relook at how you want to be structured in the future right now. Step one. Number two is you've been able to articulate some of these benefits and opportunities for 2025, some of them for 2026. Another thing you said is these are very, very large financial benefits, and to do that, you're going to have to look at your balance sheet, your borrowing capacity, and probably renegotiate your credit agreements with your lenders and avail that. But right now, I think this is probably a good time to start those connections. You can do things to manage your interest rates future, but I think these rates are going to go down. So plus.
Yeah.
You get the structure. I'd have adjustable rates or some way to take a look at this after another, say, 12 months or 24 months. But I think you're in a good window here. Right now, I want us to go off to Jonathan and put a perspective together. Obviously, your team at the Ag Expo, because many of you have attended before, has always had the presence. Senator Grassley, I think from the first time we ever started these expos, always sent a representative, always is there to base it. And in other words, there's been in the state of Iowa, the Senate, the Agriculture Committee, the Commerce Banking Committees have always been keenly actively involved in managing agriculture risk and production. So one of the things that came out, and we're going to go into questions and answers first, but one of the questions, we got a lot of questions sent in, beautiful, wonderful questions, but the first question is, Jonathan, was this big act, was this big, beautiful act a farm bill? Is there not a farm bill? How do we view this? We missed that. Is that a farm bill coming that will clean up or add more dimensions of this? And in talking to you, you said very well, there may be a farm bill coming up before year end. And could we talk about the four things that you think might be in that farm bill? And when we meet with you again, incidentally, mark your calendars for November 5th, because it'll be the next edition of this webinar podcast, which we want to invite you to right now. So get ready to put that on your calendar. But between now and then, We're going to learn more from you and others about a possible mini or specific farm bill could happen before you're in. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, first off, Grant, thank you for allowing me to be here with you guys today. It's an honor to do so. As you know, Senator Grassley has been deeply involved in, like you said, the ag, the finance, and the banking committees for his entire tenure in the United States Senate. And what we tried to do with this act is to provide certainty for rural Americans and for farmers. I mean, it's no secret, prices are very low. People are concerned. We're looking ahead to see what we could do to help to lift up our farmers, to get us over this bump in the road and get us to the next best thing. If we keep looking at it, this was monumental legislation. There was tax things in there. There was energy things in there. There's research in there. To dive into that just a little bit, this is a national security. Food security is a national security. But we... in this big, beautiful bill, there was $175 million for research to be spent in calendar year 2026. There was also, for the next generation, a lot of our listeners have kids and grandkids who want to go to college and then, potentially, hopefully, come back to the farm. There's $60 million in that piece in this legislation for ag scholarships to our land grant universities, and that's something that we haven't seen to that scale before. And going ahead, then we also have
that's very significant.
Yes, and we have in there's also $125 million to fix our aging ag infrastructure. Locks, dams, roads. All of those great things that are vital to our roles. So as you said, there is a very, very high probability that we get a skinny farm bill before the end of the year. And one thing I wanted to hit on that we got through in the one big beautiful bill, but just needs a touch of refining yet, is the reference price changes. This increased the spending on the ag side by $65 billion, which is just absolutely phenomenal. And that's to be spent over the next 10 years. Just, off the back, that raises all commodity base prices by 10 to 21%, which will be fantastic for farmers. It raises oats to $2.65 a bushel, corn to $4.10, soybeans to $10, and wheat to $6.35. So that's a huge jump in reference prices for your crop insurance, which is going to, no farmer wants to farm for insurance money, but, that helps put a safety net in going forward, especially when we had the derechos we've had, we're coming off year 4 to 5 of a drought, depending on where you're at in our listening area. So these are highly effective things that we think are going to be able to, like I said, get these farmers over the bump and to the next great thing. Another thing that Seth mentioned earlier is that this bill allows for the registration of up to 30 million more base acres. And that's based off of the 2019 to your 2025 crop reporting. But that allows a lot of these producers who have been producing grain, cattle, whatever, on these acres that have not been qualified for these federal programs to enroll them and thus get more security in their operation.
This is $60 billion, ladies and gentlemen, is a lot of money. This idea of putting safety nets or floors on pricing of your industry. If you're making carpeting, you don't have that. If you're making furniture for homes, if you're making cell phones, you're making anything else, there's no such thing. But agriculture, when they're calling to pull out the stops to secure our world domination in food and energy, what they have done concomitantly is put in very, very, very smart downside floors, and we have to see now that they've not only put these in, but they've shown more people can avail themselves of them, right?
Very much
and
so.
Now, not only can more people avail themselves of them, more entities can avail themselves of them, but he just said 30 million more acres of production are now eligible in this. So that where food and fiber, I've used that I think all of us know what that means, but food and fiber, ranches, farms, etc. They've expanded this net of 30 million acres. That's a big deal.
Yes, very much so. Looking ahead into our, what we want to see in the skinny farm bill, something that Senator's been very passionate about, is the payment limits. So more producers are able to expand their opportunities and protect themselves going forward. They're raising the cap from $124,000 to $155,000 on all Title I commodities, which is just a huge jump going forward. And Senator has said for years, in his own way, the payments that we're giving out to these farmers should go to those who have the grease on their hands and the dirt underneath their fingernails,
Yes.
not the ones who are pushing paper
Of course.
thousands of miles away. And I think we've taken a really good step towards doing so. Another thing that we're hoping to get through is a federal fix, or at least some guidelines for Prop 12. We hear this across all 99 counties. We're not quite done with our 99 county tour yet, but in every one we've been at, this has been an issue. And the problem with Prop 12 is that it comes down to its wording and marketplace cohesion. If we allow one state, in this instance California, to dictate how every other state produces food and fiber, it's going to be very detrimental, especially to Iowa agriculture, because you're going to have to play by 50 different sets of rules. And right now, the big pork producing companies, they have the money to go in and implement these rules that California passed, which, for breeding pigs, that requires 24 square foot of space per sow. And that's also, 43 square foot of space for a veal calf, or 144 square inches for an egg-laying chicken. I've raised hogs. It comes down to the interstate commerce clause of, can a state dictate how another state runs its business? And that's what we're trying to fix, especially when you have other states out there, such as Massachusetts with their Question 3 that they would like to push, and even Oklahoma had legislation that was brought forward. That one hasn't gone anywhere, but it shows us that there is a push out there from people who do not have a connection to agriculture, for farmers, ranchers, producers to have to play by their rules. And that's just not how it should be.
Well, are you saying that you don't want 50 attorney generals and 50 governors in states, 49 that are not in your state where you're producing, to be in your bedroom every night? Is that what you're saying? And deciding how you run your business?
It would make everything a lot more difficult to operate that way.
So I think this is an interstate commerce clause, and I showed you there about the various agencies. Obviously, this is interstate commerce, but over in that commerce block I showed you earlier, it's a very good example of letting independent farmers turn them loose and let them run their businesses the way they want to do it. In the same way in the energy business, it's a very complex, hugely capital-intensive business, and there has to be a lot of freedom of how they structure themselves, because they're taking big risk. And when they take big risks, you have to have flexibility and structure, and you have to have floors or benefits from marketing. Anything else that we want to cover?
Yeah, one other thing I do want to touch on very briefly is this was something that was started in the One Big Beautiful Bill, but didn't quite get through because of the Senate's Byrd Rule, and that is the Market Access Plan and the Foreign Market Development, MAP or FMD for short. Currently, those two programs have about $200 million between the two of them to hunt down new and expand the markets that we already have for our agricultural products, which are the best in the world. Because they didn't have that ability, Congress went around that. They created a new program, the Agricultural Trade Promotion and Facilitation Program, and they gave that $285 million. Yeah, correct. I want to make sure I had my figure correct. And so if we reauthorize MAP and FMD, that will be an increase of over $280 million for research into finding these new markets, which will be, now Congress has to, they have to be reappropriated, but either way, we still have a huge increase for these to find new markets.
See, ladies and gentlemen, I told you he not only looks smart, he is smart. I'm getting a big signal here. We're just about to run out of time, so here's two things I want to do. First, I want to recognize our sponsors, and you can see their names on the screen right now. Arbor Bank, Bunge, First Express Insurance, Iowa Cattlemen's Association, Iowa Corn Growers, Hemisphere Talent, which is a company to bring in labor from outside the country, Iowa Soybeans, Nebraska Cattlemen, Nebraska Corn Growers, and Sire. What do these sponsors all have in common? They are all advocates for better research, better capital, more marketing and risk management tools, and for opening up marketing. So these are your marketing right hand, left hand, and for example, we talked about risk management. Bunge and Sire have very sophisticated risk management and marketing partnerships. Iowa corn growers, soybean, are very active in opening these markets. So I want to give them a big salute and thank them for their attention and for their ability to support this as they have the other expo events. Right now, my last most important thing is to talk to you about the upcoming webinar on November 5th. Here again, our technology people are right at the ready with a code that you can mark your calendar and register. And if you do this, you'll be able to tune in for the November 5th, which is much more, Seth, about the ABCs, the implementation of this, a forward look into the Farm Bill. But be sure you register for that now. And lastly, I want to make you a great offer. As we did this time, if you send in a written question now using this code and or write into this information question right now that's on your screen, we will answer every question. So write up the question as explicitly how I do something, how I get the resources, how I get the tax information, what do I mean by these structures. Just write the questions up, and we'll do the best to answer those promptly back to all you, our valued audience. And lastly, not only do I thank the sponsors, I just got to thank the people in agriculture themselves. This is about America. You're our secret weapon for our national security, and what a great industry it is. It's very technical, very advanced, and you are some of the brightest minds, and you hold the future of America in your hands. Thank you for joining us one more time in the Ag Expo series, and we hope we see you again soon, specifically on November 5th. Mark your calendars.